BDR Comply will populate a Cures Act and FHIR server from data in almost any format. HL7, HL7 JSON, XML, RDBMS, CSV, SQL, NoSQL. Why play catch-up to current and near-future regulations? Be the industry's first, leaving your competitors violating information blocking regulations, Cures Act and the upcoming FHIR deadlines. Be the leader, be compliant. As we log in, you see the user must enter a user ID and a password and is then prompted for a two-factor authentication for added security. Here we are viewing healthcare data in MySQL, an RDBMS database that we will process into FHIR. Next we are viewing an empty FHIR server that will be populated from the RDBMS healthcare data. We are now establishing the connection to the source RDBMS healthcare database to be migrated to and ingested into the FHIR server. After establishing the connection criteria, a mapping interface will guide the user to see all the schema table names and columns and then map them to the FHIR resources and fields within the FHIR resources. The user can map as many fields into as many resources and fields as they desire and/or require. To simplify the process, the user can search with partial field names from the source RDBMS or HL7 and do the same for the naming convention of the FHIR server, which usually greatly differ. Continue this process till you have completed all your requested data for migration and ingestion into FHIR. Now with the mapping processing complete, we establish the connection to the FHIR server we want to migrate and ingest the RDBMS healthcare data into, set the data to be AES-256 encrypted, and we will also optionally write the FHIR JSON results to the Google Big Query repository. You can also set other parameters of the optional output data source such as table name and others. You can write to several data formats from SQL to NoSQL data sources. Now with the setup completed, we submit the migration ingestion process. With the process done, we now view the FHIR repository and can see it is populated. We are viewing the FHIR version table that store the important blob column that is comprised of the FHIR JSON data the FHIR uses for its dissemination of data based on the user's FHIR calls. As we noticed, BDR securely encrypted the blog data. Now we are viewing a few other of FHIR's more important tables and see when necessary, the personal health information is securely encrypted by BDR with AES encryption. As we recall, we set up the process to also write the FHIR JSON data results to the Snowflake Data Warehouse repository. We are now viewing Snowflake and we see that the FHIR JSON data has successfully been written to Snowflake. A very strategic offering of BDR is its capability to deliver the 21st Century Cures Act digital reporting for patients, and interoperability for doctors and most all healthcare personnel. Just by selecting FHIR resources and fields, patients and healthcare as well as analysts can select the data they desire and/or are entitled to view and download, and even migrate to many data sources has been made as easy as point and click. After selecting from as many as 150 FHIR resources and their over 34,000 fields, the report will reflect the patient's or user's requests, and then you will see the ability to securely download the results to a mobile device or computer, or for analysts or providers, they will have the ability to migrate the selected report to another data source, both SQL or NoSQL choices along with CSV files. Now with the user's selections completed, the user just needs to submit the process and will then be able to view their results on the BDR interface before downloading or migrating the results. Now we are viewing the requested FHIR healthcare data. The user has decided to select download to store this data on their device. The user is prompted for a two-factor security authentication and now can view the data after a secure end-to-end encrypted journey to their device. Now we will demonstrate how an analyst or other healthcare providers can migrate the results of the FHIR generated report to a SQL or NoSQL data source. In this case, we are establishing connections to a Google Big Query data source and will write our results to the Big Query data source. We are entering an optional table name for our results to be written to in the Big Query data source. We have now entered the Big Query interface and updating its results. As we can see, our report has been written to the table name we have chosen, and we can also see that the data has been written securely encrypted with AES 256 encryption. Lastly, we will demonstrate the BDR interface that assists users in establishing FHIR URL calls to retrieve data directly from the FHIR server. BDR simplifies this process in building the proper syntax. Now the user submits the FHIR retrieval call and is prompted for a secure two-factor authentication. After the two-factor authentication is successful, we can now see the FHIR JSON results in the lower box on the BDR interface. These results can be downloaded, cut and pasted into another source, or even ingested into another FHIR server. All hospitals, healthcare providers, pharmacies, health insurance companies, and software product developers and development companies that process healthcare data will need to be Cures Act and FHIR compliant. Being compliant means, 1. You have all your healthcare data in FHIR format. 2. When transmitting data to other healthcare providers, or to the government, it is transmitted in FHIR format. 3. Patients have free online access to all of their data in your FHIR server and RDBMS and other data formats. You can become Cures Act and FHIR compliant in under a month. Call 847-440-4439 for more information.